The sound of clapping still resonated throughout the glass-walled meeting room. When Jacob's invitation arrived, it was brief. 10 minutes, 41st floor. The executive suite. Just 10 minutes before, everyone in the room had risen to their feet, celebrating what seemed impossible. The organization had recovered from a devastating $650 million deficit. The recovery chart glowed bright green. Someone had even brought celebratory champagne. As the displays showed the words, "Crisis overcome," people applauded everyone, except the architect of their salvation.
Me.
I remained at the room's edge, observing the performance as if witnessing an unfamiliar play. The sales managers received congratulations. The marketing division got recognition, and Jacob, our newly appointed CEO, earned a standing ovation for what they termed consistent guidance during turbulent times. And me? I received a summons. A brief, silent message, no subject, no recognition, just coordinates and a timestamp. When I entered his office, Jacob didn't gesture toward a chair, offering only a thin smile and a manila folder. "Evelyn, I recognize your contributions have been significant," he began, but the board expressed concerns about individual recognition. They believe the bonus distribution should represent collective achievement, not singular performance. I opened the folder. My performance incentive, initially $280,000, had been slashed to $56,000.
No justification. No acknowledgement.
Simply figures on paper. He tapped the document as if it were a minor calculation error. "You comprehend, correct? At your position, excellence is anticipated. Achievement should serve as its own compensation." I didn't debate.
I didn't object.
I simply met his gaze and responded, naturally. Then I pivoted and departed deliberately, leaving the folder behind. As the elevator doors sealed, I felt no rage, only crystal-clear understanding. Jacob remained oblivious that 3 months earlier, while the company drowned in warning signs and withdrawal threats, I had already begun constructing something beyond his comprehension. A hidden infrastructure beneath their operations, a foundation that had sustained them through the catastrophe he now claimed as his triumph. And it wasn't his property. It started during a quiet catastrophe, not the headline-grabbing kind, but the type that spreads through financial statements and accelerates through silence. $220 million in international credit vanished overnight. A crucial supplier threatened departure. Treasury was blind. Legal was in chaos. The board stopped responding to calls. I was the one who remained. I restructured the entire capital flow, creating protective barriers between regions. I developed a custom intermediary layer, a system that tracked every cash movement in real time, categorized them by risk level, and redirected them before critical thresholds were breached. No existing vendor offered a solution fast enough, so I constructed one line by line on my private server using my own credentials. Since the legal department never completed the system's registration, I filed it under my own identity. I secured the intellectual property quietly and completely. That tool wasn't merely a temporary fix. It became the foundation of their recovery. They utilized it daily. They depended on it. But nobody ever questioned its origin. And Jacob, intoxicated by his first quarter of inherited stability, genuinely believed the acclaim was his. It wasn't. That applause originated from a system I created, a system they didn't truly possess. As I returned to my office, I opened the drawer, retrieved the external drive I had placed there 3 months prior, and verified its status. The system's sentinel remained operational, and control remained mine. He reduced my bonus, but I retained the architecture. He had no concept of what I had already accomplished. Monday arrived with typical routines, coffee brewing in the corridor, lights illuminating floor by floor. I entered the building as always, punctual, prepared, and unnoticed. The finance meeting was underway when I arrived. 6 chairs surrounded the long oval table. 5 occupied, 1 vacant. No longer mine. A fresh nameplate read, Monica Hale, Financial Liaison. My former position. She didn't acknowledge my entrance.
Neither did Jacob.
He was mid-presentation, gesturing toward the dashboard she had prepared. I took a seat against the wall. Nobody acknowledged my presence. The screen displayed my models, repackaged and color-adjusted with reorganized labels, but the foundation remained mine. Monica presented confidently, numbers flowing from her lips as if she had lived through the company's worst quarter. She hadn't. She had arrived after the storm cleared, after the scaffolding I built had held long enough for celebration. Approximately 15 minutes in, Victor raised his hand. "Excuse me, quick question," he said. "Why do we flag the East Asia buffer twice last cycle? I thought it only activated when we exceeded the load threshold." Monica hesitated. Her eyes shifted to Jacob. He remained silent, then to me. I said nothing. She cleared her throat. There were some conditional overlaps. "I believe Evelyn implemented dual triggers as a precaution." Victor nodded slowly, but I observed it. The doubt, the moment when confidence in the response cracked, even slightly. They continued. After the meeting, as everyone gathered their equipment, Monica approached me with a warm smile. "That went well, right?" I was anxious. I returned the smile. "You performed admirably." She paused, attempting to read my expression, then departed with a slight spring in her step. I remained behind. The room emptied, and briefly it was just me and the screen still displaying my framework with someone else's initials in the corner. At my desk, the system chimed once, then went silent. I checked the records. My notifications had been redirected. Reports I previously approved now went to Monica's shared directory. I retained access, but nothing reached me first. I didn't protest. I opened the side drawer, retrieved a small black notebook, and recorded 3 dates. The day I constructed the buffer logic, the day I transferred the keys, and today. At 4:42 p.m., Victor passed my office. He stopped at the entrance. "Hey, Evelyn, about those triggers. Any chance you recall why they were duplicated?" I closed the notebook.
Ido.
He waited. I didn't elaborate. After several seconds, he nodded awkwardly and chuckled. That evening I stayed late. I retrieved every report from the previous quarter, not the dashboards. Those were superficial polish. I extracted the raw data, the foundation Monica hadn't learned to access yet. Then I backed it all up silently and thoroughly on a drive only I knew existed.
They didn't terminate me.
They simply began rehearsing the narrative where I never existed. So I ensured I did. Thursday, 2 p.m. The meeting was larger this time, cross-departmental, hybrid, and Jacob insisted the call remain under 40 minutes. 3 clients participated remotely, one from Singapore, one from Frankfurt, one from Atlanta. High-value accounts, the type that don't request reassurance unless they've already lost confidence. Victor stood near the whiteboard, leading the discussion. Monica was beside him with a printed copy of my architecture folded like a brochure. I observed from the second row. Not at the table, not on the call roster. The presentation began smoothly. Monica walked through the new protections. Though nothing was new, it was still mine, merely relabeled. She spoke in broad terms. Automated risk indicators, self-repairing buffers, real-time adjustments. Impressive phrases that sounded sophisticated unless you understood their meaning. The clients remained quiet until the Singapore representative leaned forward. "Why did our outbound transfer pause at 11:58 p.m. on the 4th? That delay resulted in a late penalty." Monica blinked. Victor looked at her. She glanced toward Jacob, then to me. I didn't react. After a long pause, Victor attempted an answer. "It was probably the rollover mechanism. It can cause delays if the daily queue is overloaded." It was a guess and the wrong one. The Singapore client frowned. That was a low-volume day. We verified. Monica cleared her throat. "We'll follow up privately with a complete analysis." The call proceeded, but the atmosphere shifted, the kind of change that doesn't appear in transcripts but lives in silences. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the hallway near the south stairwell, where no cameras operated. Victor found me there, looking exhausted. "They want to conduct a full trace on the anomaly," he said. "We can't locate the routing logic. There's no documentation." There wouldn't be. I never uploaded that layer. It was handwritten, then coded directly into a protected structure they had cloned, but never comprehended. "You wrote that section, right?" he asked. "The midnight overrides." I nodded once. He waited, then said, "Could you just indicate where to look?" I looked at him. This person who had once been kind to me, who still tried to be decent even as others took my position and said, if they didn't preserve the roots, they shouldn't expect the tree to grow straight. He didn't know how to respond. I left him there. That evening, Jacob sent a company-wide message praising Monica and Victor for resilience under real-time pressure. No mention of the client's question, no hint of the system's first slip. But I printed that email, underlined the phrase "platform stability confirmed," and smiled because it had just begun to waver. Within the following week, the ripple had become a current. A minor reconciliation error appeared in North American operations, just a few $1,000s between internal accounts. Easy to overlook unless you were someone who checked line by line. That had been me. Now it was Victor. He discovered it late Tuesday, flagged it as a log drift, a harmless inconsistency, he said. Nothing urgent. But by Thursday, a European client noticed a delay in their confirmation window. Just 2 hours. Just once. But they were German. 2 hours mattered. Monica involved tech support. Tech support involved Treasury, and Treasury quietly sent someone to my floor. It was a compliance liaison named Julia. I had encountered her once before during the post-March audit cleanup. She was intelligent, discreet, and always carried an unmarked notebook. She knocked once, entered without waiting. "Hi, Evelyn," she said softly. "Not here officially. Just a quick question." I raised an eyebrow. The Frankfurt team logged a mismatch on a Tuesday batch. Did we ever use dual authentication on same-day clears, or was that discontinued? I leaned back. That wasn't discontinued. That was concealed. She nodded slowly. So it could still activate under the old protocol? If they copied the structure and left the triggers intact, I said, yes. Would you mind confirming? I would. She smiled, not offended. I figured. After she left, I opened my notebook, the one I hadn't let out of my sight in weeks. I created a new list: Frankfurt confirmation delay, midnight hold in Singapore, account drift. Root condition, misunderstood structure. 3 events, 3 regions, all using the same foundation. That afternoon, Jacob called a closed-door meeting. It wasn't scheduled. No agenda, no dial-in, just 6 names and a floor. Mine wasn't one of the 6, but Victor's was. So was Monica's. So was Julia's. I passed them on the way up. Nobody spoke. Victor gave a slight nod. Monica kept walking. I didn't follow. I didn't need to, because 10 minutes later I received a forwarded summary from Treasury asking all teams to pause new automation layers until further review. They called it preventative. That word told me everything. They knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to say it aloud because saying it would mean tracing it, and tracing it would lead back to a structure they didn't fully control. I packed up at 6 that evening. The office was quiet. Even the cleaning crew moved slower, as if the building itself was waiting for someone to admit what everyone felt. As I stepped into the elevator, I looked back once. The lights were still on, but I could sense it already. The system wasn't broken. It was just starting to ask questions they weren't prepared to answer. The first client to withdraw wasn't even the most vocal. It was a mid-sized logistics firm based in Ontario, quiet, precise. They moved high volumes, but rarely complained. On Monday, they flagged 3 minor inconsistencies in transfer confirmations. On Wednesday, their CFO called Jacob directly. On Thursday, they froze all pending activity. Just like that, $7.4 million in monthly flow vanished. The announcement came in a flat internal memo labeled Client Transition. No panic, no language about failure, just a bullet-pointed list of service reassignments and next steps. But I saw the signs. 2 desks near mine were cleared that afternoon. No announcement, just empty screensavers and phones that stopped ringing. Victor passed me in the hallway around 4 o'clock. He looked pale. "We're running full audits on all cross-regional sync points," he said, as if talking to himself more than me. "There's something wrong." I nodded and kept walking. Monica, meanwhile, had begun holding meetings behind closed doors, not with Jacob, but with legal. I noticed the pattern. Every day around 11:15, she stepped into the same soundproof booth. She emerged tight-lipped, eyes sharp. Her voice lost its warmth. She stopped greeting people in the elevator. On Friday, someone from the Singapore client team visited the office in person, a tall woman with perfect posture and the kind of expression that says, "I already know. I'm just confirming it." She didn't ask to meet me, but I saw her glance across the floor when Monica tried to explain the recent batch delay as legacy sync errors. The woman's face didn't change. By 2 p.m., 3 project heads were asked to submit written summaries of platform dependencies. Victor's looked like a student's final exam, long, careful, full of disclaimers. He came to my office afterward. "Evelyn," he said, "do you still have the original deployment structure?" I looked up. "You mean the one everyone copied but never documented?" He flushed. "We didn't think we'd need it. We assumed." "That's the problem," I said. "You assumed it would work just because it looked stable." He stayed a moment longer, then left without asking for access. That night, Jacob sent a message to all senior staff. It was shorter than usual, no branding, no signature line, just one sentence. Until further notice, all automated triggers must be manually reviewed before execution. I stared at that sentence for a long time. They had taken my system, stripped it, painted over it, and called it something new. But now they were disabling the automation I had built because nobody left understood how to trust it. That was the cost, not just in money, but in time, in certainty, in the quiet moments when someone asked a question and nobody in the room had the answer. At 7:30 p.m., the office was nearly empty. I stood by the window overlooking the main street below. Traffic moved as it always had. Nobody out there knew anything had gone wrong. But inside, the silence had shifted. It was no longer ignorance, it was recognition. The system still worked, but it no longer worked for them. By Monday, the calm was gone. Doors stayed shut longer. Voices behind them grew louder. Nobody screamed, but the tones had changed. Short, clipped, careful, like people walking across a frozen lake they knew was cracking beneath them. I passed Monica outside the executive floor, just after 10. She was staring at her phone as if it had insulted her. When she looked up, she didn't smile. She just said, "You never answered my message last week." "I didn't see a question," I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it. That afternoon, Jacob held a leadership briefing, not optional, no virtual attendees. Every director was expected in person. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it by 4 p.m. when one of the marketing leads stepped into the break room and said too loudly, apparently, the entire stability layer wasn't properly registered. Nobody knows who owns the IP. I sipped my tea. A moment later, someone else added, "If it fails now, legal says we can't pursue the original builder for liability because it's not officially assigned." They looked around. Their eyes didn't land on me, but the silence did. Jacob started walking the floor more often after that, not to check work, but to watch, to see who was whispering to whom. At one point, he passed my office and paused just long enough to show he was there, then moved on without a word. The system still ran, but by Wednesday, 2 more clients had recalibrated their usage. No dramatic exits, no angry emails, just less activity, less trust. And then it happened. A trigger failed in the London segment. A buffer meant to slow high-volume spikes activated, but didn't release. It froze $2.1 million for 6 hours. No loss, just delay. But the client saw it, and they called it out. Monica pulled Victor and 2 others into a war room. The door shut hard. The blinds were drawn. I saw none of it. I only saw their faces afterward. Pale, shiny with stress, blinking like they had seen a ghost. By 6 p.m., Victor showed up at my door again. "We need your help," he said. His voice was lower than before, smaller. "This isn't about credit anymore. We're losing control of the system." I didn't answer. I just kept organizing files. "We're not trying to take it," he added. "We just need to know where it's headed." I finally looked at him. "You're asking the wrong question." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You keep asking what it does. You should ask what happens if it stops doing it." He didn't reply. I let the silence settle. That night, Monica sent a note to the board. I knew because it leaked. Everything leaked now. The subject line said, "Urgent. Stability pathway attribution unclear." It didn't have my name, but it was the first time they admitted they didn't know how deep the roots went. And once they said it aloud, the unraveling began. By Friday morning, The mask had slipped. There was no more pretending the structure was sound, not after the London freeze, not after the Frankfurt team escalated a timestamp glitch that delayed their investor report by 90 minutes. 90 minutes doesn't make headlines, but when funds sit idle, trust bleeds fast. Jacob called an emergency executive session. The subject line didn't bother with euphemisms. It said system ownership, immediate clarification required. The word ownership hit harder than they realized because for the first time, they stopped asking what was wrong with the system and started asking whose it was. I wasn't on the invite list, but again, someone forwarded the notes, and again, I didn't need to be in the room. I already knew how it would unfold. Monica tried to explain the architecture. Victor tried to trace the components. But when the board asked who exactly implemented the first version of the override logic, nobody had a clean answer. Someone said it was part of the early recovery sprint. Someone else said it was already live when they joined. Someone, probably Jacob, said they assumed it came from Treasury. Assumed. That word again. By midday, legal requested access logs from 6 months back. They wanted to see who touched what, when, and under whose credentials. That was when Monica panicked. She came to my desk unannounced for the first time in weeks. "Evelyn," she said quickly, "do you still have your original notes? I mean, the real ones from the early recovery phase." I looked up slowly. "I have what I built." She swallowed. "Could you share the documentation with legal? They're trying to validate attribution." "Is there a question about authorship?" She hesitated. "Not formally, but it would help the company." "The company," I repeated. She nodded. "We're all on the same side." That was when I smiled, not with joy, but with finality. "Are we?" She didn't answer, just blinked, then left. By 4 p.m., a lockdown was issued. Internal systems froze all external device connections. No more exports, no more backups. They were trying to wall off the ship, but the ship was already leaking because the problem wasn't where the data went, the problem was what it depended on to function. And that part still answered to me. When the system pinged at 6:22 p.m. with an anomaly alert in the risk sequencing module, it was the fourth one that week, but this time nobody replied. The alerts no longer had a destination. The people reading them no longer had the authority. I closed my laptop, stood, and walked to the far window. Below, the city moved as if nothing had changed. But upstairs, Jacob was drafting an internal memo, one that would never be sent. Because before you can fix a system, you have to admit you never understood it. And Jacob wasn't ready to say those words. The message came at 9:16 a.m., not from Monica, not from Victor, but from the chief operating officer. Just a name, no subject line. "Can you step into room 7C at 10? I hadn't been in that room since the original crisis meetings, the ones where nobody was sure we'd survive Q4, the ones where I sketched solutions on a whiteboard with a dead marker and people pretended to understand. I didn't reply. I just showed up. When I walked in, the air felt different, heavy, quiet. Monica sat at the far end, pale, her hair pulled back too tightly. Victor sat beside her, holding a printout with both hands. Jacob stood. The chief operating officer remained seated. He gestured toward a chair across from them. "Evelyn," he said, "we're hoping you can help us clarify a few things. Not fix, not return, just clarify." I sat down without a word. Jacob cleared his throat. "There's a sequence mismatch in the downstream logic. Every time we adjust the risk buffer manually, the delay interval doubles. We tried resetting the framework, but it keeps re-triggering." I said nothing. Monica added quickly, "We think the system's interpreting our overrides as threats, which means it's self-correcting in the wrong direction." That was accurate, because I had built it to protect the system even from its own handlers. The chief operating officer leaned forward. "We need to know how to reset the learning path, just enough to stabilize operations until we can fully rewrite it." I looked at him. "So, you're not asking for the old version, just a way to make this version stop reacting?" He nodded. "And if it breaks further? We'll manage," I asked. I smiled. "You've been managing." A long silence followed. Jacob finally said, "Evelyn, we underestimated the depth of what you built. That's clear now." "That's not the problem," I said. Victor looked confused. "Then what is the problem?" I said softly, "The problem is that none of you asked what it was for. You only asked what it did." I stood. Nobody stopped me. As I reached the door, the chief operating officer said, "If we gave you full access again, would you be willing to?" I turned back. To what? To walk us through the code. Explain the logic. I looked at Monica. Her eyes dropped. "No," I said. "You don't need my explanation. You need my intention. And that part you lost." I walked out. Back at my desk, I opened the log summary. 5 more anomalies. 1 freeze, 1 unsent client notice, 1 timed out approval. They hadn't lost $1 million yet, but it was coming because they were no longer in control. And the system? The system knew. Monday started with silence. No all-hands meeting, no dashboard updates, no morning greetings. Just muted footsteps and screens that flickered with error windows nobody dared to click. At 9:03 a.m., 2 things happened simultaneously. First, Monica's desk was cleared, no email, no announcement, just gone. A box under her chair, and a ghost in her place. Her nameplate had been quietly removed, her calendar scrubbed. I only found out because someone from Human Resources whispered it outside the elevator. She's been put on leave pending review. Second, the Sydney client canceled. Not paused, not reduced, canceled. 12 years of partnership. $18 million annually. Gone in 7 words. We no longer trust the system's logic. That was all. Victor looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was wrinkled, collar askew, mouth dry.